Hi, I am Arun Bagil and now I am going to start chapter 2 and part 2 of Karma, and that is seeds of volition. So, what determines human volition? Why do some people operate out of a greater sense of inclusiveness and other out of a greater sense of exclusiveness? Look at this closely. You will see that volition is shaped fundamentally by your belief that you are separate being an individual. In other words, it is your identification with your individuality that determines your volition. The operative word here is identification. If you were not identified with a sense of separateness, you would not be accumulating karma. If your identification were all inclusive, that would be the end of the karmic cycle. Unfortunately, people's identification with narrow nations of individuality makes them engage with the world selectively rather than inclusively. The endless oscillation between like and dislike, attraction and aversion further harness their sense of separateness. Over time, likes and dislikes freeze into a personality and produce more karma. Individuality now becomes a prison rather than a privilege. Gautama the Buddha's teachings on the subject, his emphasis on desirelessness in particular, have unfortunately been misinterpreted and mutilated by many. Now, this was an incredible, perceptive man who would have known only too well that without desire there can be no existence. What he was pointing to the importance of operating out of a state of inner fulfillment rather than inner hankering. Once this is accomplished, your life becomes an expression of a bliss, not a pursuit of it. Your desires does not evaporate, instead it becomes conscious. Your desire is no longer than the unconscious fuel for your personal identity. It is the conscious tool by which you function. You will now desire the well-being of the entire planet. The crux of the matter, therefore, is identification with your desires. When you are no longer identified with your desire, when there is a distance between you and your mind, you simply do what is needed for the moment and for the situation. You learn to play with desire. The desires are no longer about you anymore. Now, your karmic bondage vanishes entirely. How can one disidentified with desire? How can there be desire without individuality, intention without identity? The logic is simple. Individuality is a myth. It is an idea, not an existential reality. We have fragmented our world out of ignorance. Once you are in a touch with the foundation of intelligence that underlies all the creation, you realize that you are not separate from anyone or anything else. You are inseparably linked to the rest of the universe. Your body already knows that it is a part of a great molecular dance of the cosmos. It knows that it will not survive for a moment without transacting with the air, water, sunlight and earth. Your mind, however, believes otherwise. It is convinced it is a limited entity. Therefore, any volition based on this limited understanding goes against the fundamental design of the source of creation. Any action that is impelled by such short-sighted and narrow volition invariably means karma, or in other words, more compulsive existence. Human beings have come to life on this planet with a tremendous possibilities, that of absolute freedom. The yogic culture has reiterated this time and again. Every other animal has a fixed nature. They are simply operating on the basis of their instincts. This is why animals accumulated minimal karma. The human being, on the other hand, has come with the incredible capacity of transforming and transcending these instincts. Unfortunately, most people do not have the necessary stability to remove themselves from the activity they are performing. They are unable to act without a personal agenda. This is the crippling limitations they have imposed on themselves. On a certain day, Sankaran Pillai went to the bar. He parked his donkey, which happened to be the mode of transport outside. After doing a few drinks, he came out and found that someone has painted his donkey red. Sankaran Pillai was a very frail man. But now, with a couple of drinks inside him, he felt big. He flew into a rage, strode back to the bar, kicked the doors open, and stood glaring around at everyone seated there. Who painted my donkey red? He snarled. A huge man, well over 6 feet tall, loomed up in a corner. I did, he said. Sankaran Pillai's manner changed instantly. He cleared his throat and said politely, Sir, it is now ready for the second court. The above is, of course, an expedient reaction to a situation. Like most people, Sankaran Pillai's reaction was based on simple survival instinct in the face of a threat. There is a difference, however, between a reaction based on self-preservation and a response based on the intrinsic needs of a situation. When your actions are no longer about you, when they are simply based on the demands of the situation, when narrow self-interest no longer fuels your volition, you have reached the end of karmic production, your liberation. Of course, this is easier said than done. The problem is that people have forgotten how to be inclusively involved with life. Since their involvement is selective, they fall into the trap of entanglement. They neither engage with the life selectively on the basis of their likes and dislikes, or opted for life-shaping philosophies of denial and detachment. In both cases, karma only multiplies. Misconceptions of this kind are many. Many believe the Buddha preached that life is suffering or dukkha, and concluded that his is therefore a dismal outlook of a defeatism. What they overlook is that the Buddha spent his life trying to reach people meditation because he saw that humanity can transcend suffering. If he believed that suffering was all, he would have advised us to commit suicide. He saw that bliss, Anand, was a very real possibility. His life mission was to remind us of it. A journalist recently asked me, do you agree that life is suffering? I asked him, if you had a choice, what would you want your life is to, suffering or bliss? He immediately replied, bliss, of course. Ultimately, life is neither suffering nor bliss. It is what you want it to be. Life has no inherent quality whatsoever. The choice is always yours. The volition is always yours. Adiyogi, the first yogi, was the first figure on the planet to assert that spiritual evolution is a great possibility, available only to humanity. The human being has come with the possibility of being a completely conscious being rather than a compulsive one. We can choose to be a whichever way we want, a tiger or a deer, a divinity or a demon. We have no fixed nature. Unfortunately, we suffer this fluidity, this phenomenal gift of our freedom. Most people have turned into human animals or creatures, not human beings. We have frittered away our freedom, bartered and sold it to the external authorities, whether parental, religious, culture or political. Instead of exercising the freedom of our consciousness of choice, we have bought into the voices that have sold us that to be human is to be limited, even sinful. And so instead of being the finest creatures on this planet, we have turned into the worst. We kill for pleasure, for love, for hatred, for identity, for God, for just anything. Which other animal has unleashed so much wanton cruelty, animosity and bloodshed on the planet? Ironically, human volition, the source of our freedom, has turned into a curse. Instead of a journeying from instinct to intelligence, from compulsive to consciousness, they have opted to regress. We have reached that point in our collective history where we have forgotten the enormous significance of being human. On an unconscious mission of self-destruction, we have compromised the extraordinary birthright of being the true masters of life. Now we will talk about the avoidance accelerates karmic accumulation. There is yet another unfortunate misunderstanding around karma and volition. Since the endless oscillation between like and dislikes creates karma, philosophies of avoidance and detachment have begun to grow popular. We have seen how Gautama the Buddha teaching of desirelessness has been misinterpreted. All these philosophies and misinterpretations spring from a single impulse to avoid karma. The irony is that the more you try to avoid karma, the more it multiplies. All the life-denying philosophies of detachment have developed because of human fear of entanglement. What these philosophies overtook is that without an all-consuming, passionate involvement, there would be no life. What these philosophies end up denying altogether is life itself. Philosophies of detachment are essentially joyless creeds. Embracing them might produce some semblance of balance and stability in day-to-day life, but they do not lead to liberation. Instead, they frequently lead to greater karmic accumulation. Those who practice these life-denying philosophies turn slowly lifeless themselves. Inviting lifelessness is negative karma. The suppression of a life is most definitely negative karma. Now, what do you mean by suppression? Doing something you do not want to do is not necessarily suppression. Some traditions, for instance, encourage practitioners to fast at certain times. This is not suppression. People often think that not doing what they want to do at any given moment is suppression. This is not so. Suppression simply means you are experiencing life half-heartedly. To live fully is to allow yourself to experience something totally. If you allow yourself to experience hunger totally, it is wonderful and liberating. If you allow yourself to experience food totally, it is also wonderful and liberating. Unfortunately, people do not experience either hunger or food totally. If you avoid any experience, whether pain or pleasure, sorrow or joy, it is weak karma. But if you go through the experience without resisting it, the karma dissolves. This is why Krishna in the great Indian epic the Mahabharata says the hesitation is the worst of all crimes. Today, in the same name of a civilization and etiquette, educated people often do not experience any of their emotions fully. They cannot cry fully. They cannot laugh loudly. Over a period of a time, frustration sets in and they turn joyless. Their karmic accumulations also increases. You will see that the simpler people who allow themselves to laugh and cry uninhibitedly as the impetus arises are often much freer. They work out their karma by experiencing each emotional state fully. Living totally does not mean just having a good time. It means experiencing anything that comes your way fully and intensely. The very process of life is dissolution of karma. If you live very moment of your life totally,